Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm kind of taking a little deep dive into the Overwatch League and Overwatch Contenders to answer a question that a lot of people I think have been having after a tweet from Andy Miller that was kind of sent out during the finals for the Summer Showdown. And it was a very specific, somewhat like arguably attacking tweet. Maybe not attacking is the best way to say it. Anyway, Andy Miller went out with a tweet where he talked about the way that the tournament format is done, and he felt like it was not the best. And he said that the winners of the upper bracket don't have enough of an advantage, and that they need to rework the format for Overwatch League tournaments. And I saw this, and I was curious, and I kind of said, you know what, let's take a deep dive, and let's take a look and see what the reality is with this, and let's see if that is true, and the upper bracket teams do need more of an advantage, or if evidence suggests that they don't really need an advantage or disadvantage. So I took a look at a number of tournaments in both the Overwatch League and Overwatch Contenders with the kind of current format, or some potentially mild iterations of it. But the main thing I'm looking for is that there was an upper bracket and a lower bracket, and the upper bracket team and the lower bracket team, met in the grand finals within a day. Basically, I didn't want to do the 2019 grand finals. It could be a little more than a day, I guess. But the 2019 grand finals I didn't include because that was absurdly long between them, and so that advantage was gone, so it didn't really matter. So I wanted to look at tournaments where there was not a massive amount of time in between matches happening. So real quick, let's just name all the tournaments we have here. We have the 2020 playoffs for the Overwatch League, the 2021 May Melee, the 2021 June Joust, 2021 Summer Showdown, 2021 Countdown Cup, and 2021 playoffs. So all 5 tournaments from 2021. In the 2022 season, we have both the APAC and NA Kickoff Clash, the Midseason Madness, the APAC and NA Summer Showdowns, and then in Overwatch Contenders, we have all of this year's A-Sides and B-Sides tournaments, with the exception of the Korean B-Sides tournament, because that one is still ongoing, and it won't be finished until next week. But I figured I would just kind of dive in and take a look at these. And I wanted to kind of digest and dissect and kind of look at the numbers and kind of talk about whether or not there is an advantage to being the team that wins in the upper bracket or not, or if it is truly something that there is a significant and noticeable disadvantage to the teams that are your champions in the upper bracket, or if there's just not enough advantage. So, of those tournaments that I mentioned, that was 20 tournaments total. 15 of those tournaments were won by the team that advanced to the grand finals from the upper bracket. The exceptions to that would be the 2021 June Joust, in which the Dallas Fuel won in the upper bracket, but were defeated by the Shanghai Dragons in the finals. The 2022 Kickoff Clash in the APAC region, in which the Philadelphia Fusion made it through the upper bracket, but the Seoul Dynasty won the tournament. The Midseason Madness for this year, in which the San Francisco Shock were the team that won in the upper bracket, but the Gladiators were the team that won the tournament. The A-Sides Australia for this year in Contenders, in which Direwolves were the team that won the upper bracket, but Mind Freak won the tournament. And, how fitting, the B-Sides for Australia this time around, in which Mind Freak won the upper bracket, but Direwolves won the entire grand finals. Isn't that fun? They got their revenge from the previous tournament. So 15 out of 20 tournaments were won by the team that made it from the upper bracket. So from that number alone, it seems like the advantage is pretty firm in the direction of the team that won the upper bracket. Obviously, not 100% win rate. If it was, I think you'd have to look kind of the other way and say, yeah, very clearly like the upper bracket team has the advantage. But 15 out of 20, that's a 75% win rate, essentially. That's pretty good for the team at the top. I think that you have to kind of respect that and say, okay, that's a pretty good number. The way the current format works, however, you have really two main advantages to being the team that wins in the upper bracket. Number one is you play fewer matches, and that means you have more kind of time to rest than you would if it was you were not the team from the upper bracket that made it. By being in the upper bracket, you have way more time to kind of rest and watch matches. The other advantage you get is that you get first map choice in the series. Rest is a very obviously kind of differing thing because how much rest you get can differ from series to series, from tournament to tournament. Like, for example, like I mentioned before, in the 2021 Grand Finals, I believe the Shanghai Dragons qualified for the finals on like a Thursday, and then the Grand Finals happened on Saturday. Whereas in the Midseason Madness or the Kickoff Clash this year, they qualified the day before the Grand Finals. I believe the 2020 playoffs was the same way, or the Shock qualified the day before the Grand Finals happened. So obviously that is a factor that changes from tournament to tournament. And some of the ones where they've had the most rest, like that 2021 Grand Finals, that was a sweep for the Shanghai Dragons. They won every map in that one. Or you look at something like the 2020 playoffs, which wasn't a sweep, but the Shock did win that one. The ones where you have a lot more rest, it seems like that kind of goes that way. But I don't think necessarily the amount of rest you get is that different between like a day. It matters a little bit, but it doesn't matter as much. Like I said, like 2019 Grand Finals, that amount of rest definitely canceled out really any advantage that the Vancouver Titans had other than they got to pick the map first. But the amount of rest you get does matter, and it does help your team have the ability to not have to worry as much, and you have more chances to kind of watch the other team, you have more ability to scrim, and I just think resting in general is a really big thing that can help a team. I think a big kind of conversation that was always had was the team that wins in the upper bracket has a distinct advantage because they have the ability to go kind of have this momentum that brings them into the Grand Finals. And then on the other side, you have, well, the team at the top plays fewer games. There was more rested when the finals come around, so they have the bigger advantage. And I think that the question comes down to how often then does that team with rest win their first map, right? If we are going to roll with this theory that the team from the lower bracket has more momentum going into the Grand Finals, how often does the team from the lower bracket actually win that first map? And it's actually a very interesting statistic to look at because of the 20 tournaments that I looked at, 9 of the upper bracket teams actually won their first map session. Less than 50% of the team that less than 50% of instances where the team in the upper bracket had obviously first map pick, they won that first map. Now, some of them are interesting in my opinion when you kind of look at some of the numbers. For example, in the 2022 Midseason Madness, the LA Gladiators won the first map, which was selected by the San Francisco Shock. However, the day before, the Shock had picked a different control map, which they won on, than the one they chose against the Gladiators. And that tournament in particular was an interesting one because a lot of people criticized the Shock for their map selection in that series because they picked maps that they didn't win the day before. Like they won the series the day before, and they didn't pick the maps that they won in that series, and then they lost. And that was something I remember seeing a lot of people criticize the team for that. Andy Miller, who of course is the owner of the Shock, is now upset about the team not getting some advantages. So they chose the map, and they didn't choose the map that the day before they'd won, which I think is interesting. That is another kind of case when you look in contenders mostly. The EU A-Sides tournament, the first map was won by O1 Esports, but it was a map that Munich Esports, who won that tournament, it wasn't the map they won the day before. In the A-Sides tournament, Talon Esports won O2 Blast's map pick. That O2 Blast didn't win the day before. It happened in B-Sides in North America, where Redbirds won the first map, but it wasn't the one Odyssey picked the day before. Same with Team Peps in EU for B-Sides. They won the first map, even though it was a different map from the one X Oblivion had won the day before. So there is a number of these, I believe it's 4 or 5 of them, 5 of them, where the team that won the first map won a map that was different than a map of the same type that the team from the upper bracket had won the day before. So I think it's interesting to look at. One of my favorite statistics, though, is that in both the Summer Showdown in 2021 and the Countdown Cup in 2021, the Chengdu Hunters won the first map in both of those series. In the Summer Showdown, it was the only map they won. In the Countdown Cup, it was the only map they won in the first 4. And they won 2 in a row late in the series to bring it to map 7, of course. But it's an interesting thing to look at. And so when you look at the numbers, the question you ask then is, well, do the upper bracket teams need a bigger or better advantage? Because clearly the numbers show that the majority of instances, or in the majority of tournaments, the team from the upper bracket wins the tournament. That means, generally speaking, if you use the kind of rules of, the tournament, right, the best team in the tournament, right, the one that makes it through the upper bracket, wins the tournament 75% of the time. That's a pretty good number. It's a good enough number where you have the potential for upsets, but you'd think, like, a 1 in 4 chance for an upset is a pretty good, healthy, competitive number. But the fact that less than 50% of the time that first bracket team wins the first map, I think lends credence to the theory that having the momentum going into the grand finals does help you. Because if you think about it, right, in the tournaments, like, for example, in the APAC region kickoff clash this year, the Seoul Dynasty 4-0'd the Philadelphia Fusion. The Dynasty had a 5-map match with the Dragons the day before, or not the day before, immediately before that, and then were warmed up, so they played the Fusion. Now, the Dynasty was a better team than the Fusion. I think everyone would agree with that. And they didn't play earlier in the tournament. If they had, the Dynasty most likely would have won. But you have the idea that, the Dynasty were then hot and the Fusion couldn't catch them. But also the Dynasty were the better team, so that's why they won. In the mid-season madness, you could make the argument that the reason why the Gladiators were able to take an early lead is because they were warmed up and the Shock weren't. But once again, based on what we saw in the kickoff clash, you could make the argument that the Gladiators were the better team. And the Shock, like I said, map picks were a little suspect. In the Summer Showdown for the APAC region, Seoul won the first map. Even though the Dragons were dominant for most of the series, Dynasty won the first map, and maybe that's because they were hot from their map that they played and the match they played immediately earlier in that day. Whereas when you look at something like the 2021 playoffs, where the Reign didn't play the match the exact same day, or the 2020 playoffs where the Shock and Dynasty didn't play the immediately right before, the Dynasty didn't play immediately right before, maybe that is the reason why. When you look and you see that there is a day in between the lower bracket finals and the grand finals, you see that the upper bracket team always wins the first map, based on this kind of relatively small sample size, granted. But it's interesting. It's an interesting discussion to have. And are there better solutions and better formats for the team that goes to the grand finals? I've seen people say that the team that advances to the grand finals from the upper bracket should get a map automatically, so they don't have to play, or they basically have to win 3 maps instead of having to win 4 maps. There's obviously different ways to go about it. There's tons of different things, but I think generally speaking, the format works very well. I think that there is definitely I think the only solution there is, if you had to make a change, would be to give the upper bracket team a free map at the very beginning of the series, so they start up 1-0, so they would win by winning 3 maps because they already have a map to begin with, versus a situation where the team at the bottom still win 4 maps, right? So the advantage is that they don't have to win as many maps to win the whole thing. I think that's a thing that you could make work, because it would give a noticeable advantage where you give them first map pick and they start with a map. I don't necessarily like the idea that they get first map pick if they start with a map. I think if you give them a map, the lower bracket team should get map pick, because to me you're basically starting up 2-0 at that point in time. So, or most likely you're starting 2-0 at that point in time, because if you have the first map pick and you start with a map, if the other team is able to win that map that you just chose, well, then they're just tied. So I think there's ways to do it that would be interesting, but I think the format the way it is now is the best possible solution. I think that there are definitely ways around it. I think you have to be very smart with your map pick. I think that's a big part of it. There's a strategy to it. But the fact of the matter is 75% of the time, the upper bracket team wins the tournament. And we can revisit this at the end of the season once we have the playoffs done for this season, because the playoffs this season, the losers finals and the grand finals happen on the same day. And if our theory, or my theory at least, that playing back-to-back games gives you a better chance of winning map 1 of a series, it holds true, then maybe the team that wins the upper bracket will lose map 1. Or it doesn't matter. And we'll find out just by watching what happens here. Obviously, you look at something like the Summer Showdown in the Western region, the Dallas Fuel, even though the Shock played a series earlier in the day, still swept them. So it's not impossible for it to happen, but it's an interesting statistic to look at, and it's something interesting to look at. But my general conclusion and my general feelings on the matter are that Andy Miller's take is a little bit more specific, and in a way, he's annoyed at the fact that the San Francisco Shock lost the midseason madness because they didn't get the enough advantages by winning the upper bracket. That's how I view it. It's more of a, my team lost, so I'm going to take my anger out and blame it on the league, as opposed to blaming it on my team's decisions, which, to be fair, I wasn't in there for the coaching decisions for the Shock. There are, I imagine, very specific and valid reasons why they chose not to pick the maps they won the day before, but it didn't work. So I think sometimes you have to ask, maybe it isn't the league's decision that led to this, but you have to sometimes think maybe it was a coaching decision that was a problem, and that's why we got put in that position. But that's how I view it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, if you think that there needs to be a change in the format or not, based on what I talked about. I'd love to hear from you. And if you want more videos of this in the future, let me know. This one's kind of just a lot of me just talking and spewing out numbers, unfortunately. But I do have more stuff, obviously, that I could do, similar kind of things that I actually would be kind of interested in talking about. So let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on this. And if you enjoyed this video or more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. That's going to be all for me for today. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.